So in many households, there's a day in the summer when a child will appear before their caregiver to deliver an ancient complaint: "I'm bored." And there are some caregivers who have a response ready to go. There's the classic, "Oh, hi, bored, I'm Dad." Others reach for the more practical, "Well, I have 5 chores that need your attention." The more philosophical among us may say, "Only boring people get bored." And the optimists might say, "Boredom is the beginning of creativity." All of these responses have something in common. They're trying to alleviate the distress that the child feels from a lack of entertainment. Somewhere along the way growing up, we don't need anyone else to fix that for us. We arrange our lives with so much constant stimulation that genuine stillness becomes something that we don't have to endure, or, depending on how you look at it, something we no longer get to experience. When I was preparing for a long flight 20 years ago, I would pick a good book and I'd pack away my knitting. Now I make sure my devices are charged and that they will work in airplane mode. But a few years ago, in 2023, I had the opportunity to cease being busy and rediscover boredom. This was when Central granted me 5 months of renewal leave, sometimes referred to as a sabbatical. And during those 5 months, I took the time to go out to Colorado to spend a month on a silent retreat. This was an opportunity to engage with the full 30-day spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius. I met every morning with my spiritual director, and it was the only conversation I had each day. We would review the prayer and scripture exercises for that day and reflect on what happened the previous day. And then I was surprised. At the end of the first week, my only assignment was to gather the graces from the previous week. There was a Sabbath day built right into the structure of this retreat. In my mind, the entire 30 days was like a Sabbath practice. And so I was actually quite surprised what it felt like to let time unfold on that day, not following that pattern I had said of prayer and walking and writing. That Sabbath continued throughout the whole month that I was blessed to be on retreat there. And when I returned, a lot of my friends and neighbors were interested in hearing about my experience. And I still remember one of my friends saying, "I could never stand to have that much silence. I don't like to be alone with my thoughts." Turns out, she's not alone in that feeling. In 2014, the psychologist Timothy Wilson at the University of Virginia published research showing that most people find it very difficult and unpleasant to sit alone with their thoughts for just 15 minutes. In one of the most striking findings from this study, a number of participants chose to administer mild electric shocks to themselves rather than simply sitting quietly with nothing to do. They preferred mild physical pain to stillness. When I read that, I wanted to dismiss it as an outlier. But then I thought about how many times a day, when I have 30 seconds to wait for an elevator, do I pull out my phone? And then I realized that might be harder to dismiss this research. Now, I do want to be mindful that there are some people, for genuine mental health reasons, who avoid prolonged silence, and that's wisdom that needs to be honored. But for most of us, I think what my friend was describing is different. It's simply we've become so thoroughly accustomed to stimulation, whether it's listening to music, the notifications on our devices, or some background noise happening, that the thought of sitting in silence without anything to distract us from our thoughts is uncomfortable. We may have forgotten how to be bored. And in forgetting that, we may have also lost our ability to truly rest. The ancient text from Genesis that we heard just a few moments ago that Tricia read is trying to tell us something very important that is woven into the fabric of how God made everything. Now, something is interesting. If you listened closely to the way she was reading, the narrative in that chapter has a rhythm that is steady and almost hypnotic. Day 1, day 2, day 3, everything follows the same pattern. God speaks, something comes into being. God looks at what has been made, and God calls it good. Every morning, God calls it good. 6 times that pattern repeats. Chaos becomes order, emptiness is filled, and after each act of creation, there is a pause, a moment of recognition for God to declare that it was good. That refrain builds through the 6 days until the very last, when humanity is made in God's own image. That time, it is very good. And then, on the 7th day, God stops. No new creatures, no further shaping of light and shadow, no rearranging of seas and skies. The work is finished, and the Maker simply ceases. God looked at everything that had been made and chose not to do anymore. That's a remarkable thing for the creator of the universe to do. And in our specific culture, it is a countercultural thing to do. How often when we meet someone we know, we say, "How have you been?" And the answer is, busy. We live in a world that doesn't want to stop. From 24/7 news channels to inboxes that refill before you have a chance to clear them out. The mental list of things undone that follows you to bed at night, already waiting for you before you open your eyes in the morning. Whether we call it the Protestant work ethic or simply capitalism, we have built an entire economy around the idea that rest is a reward for sufficient productivity, and that there'll be time to slow down later, after the busy season, after things finally settle down. The trouble is, things never really actually settle down. There's always something that feels urgent, demanding our attention, whether that urgent item is important or not. Many of us have quietly absorbed the cultural values that human worth is measured by human productivity. And it's very hard to set that value down, even in the church. But our text from Genesis has something vital to say to us in this culture. This creation narrative is not intended to be a scientific account of how the world came into being. It is a theological narrative written to answer the question not how things came into existence, but to answer the question of who made them and why. It is a shape of a well-ordered human life to know our identity and why we are here. So this text is about meaning and identity. So let's listen to those 6 days again. It's not about a hurried creator rushing through a checklist. There are repeated pauses. There's careful looking. There's careful examination that says, this is good. The creator notices and takes time to savor what has been made. That is not something I'm good at. I'm so relieved to check something off on my to-do list and move on to the next thing. It takes discipline for me to stop and celebrate. And so I'm reminded that in the rhythm of creation, God set this up for us. Make and then see. Work and then notice. Stop long enough to recognize that what has been made is good. And then God shows us that on the 7th day, it's time to stop. God blessed that 7th day and called it holy. Here we have God present in creation, not absence, not withdrawing, not turning away, but God simply savoring creation. What would it like to be present without working? What does it mean to rest in the middle of something instead of withdrawing from it? When God rested on that seventh day, God inhabited creation fully. The work was done, and God could simply enjoy it, giving attention to what had been made and what was good. And now at the very end of our text, there's one more small detail. The rhythm has already changed because God is no longer speaking things into existence. But on the previous 6 days, we know that the days ended. But now, this day is not bound. The seventh day does not have a closing. There is no morning after. The narrative leaves the day open. I think this is an intentional gift to tell us about the nature of this day. Every other day was finite, but the seventh is not. It begins and does not end. The Jewish philosopher Abraham Joshua Hessel wrote that the Sabbath is a cathedral in time rather than a cathedral in space. When we build churches or cathedrals or other spaces for worship, we set aside physical space set apart for God. The architecture itself signals that something different is happening here. And the Sabbath does the same thing with time. It creates a cathedral within our hearts for the spaciousness of God's presence to be with us. The Sabbath creates a threshold that we are invited to cross each week into a different kind of time that is not organized around productivity or accomplishment, time that is organized around being present with God. What does it look like to actually cross this threshold? To treat one day each week as genuinely different? It's not a day of religious obligations. It is a day of paying attention, a day when you are fully present to your own life, to God's creation, and to the way God is present in your life with you. The Sabbath was not invented when God gave the commandments to Moses. You'll hear that text next week. But even before the law was given, Sabbath was woven into the structure of creation. And that means that we were made for this pattern of living, of appreciating, of enjoying Sabbath. It's not a rule, it's a homecoming. It is, at its heart, trusting that we can stop working and that the world will still continue to exist. It is about us declaring that our worth is not measured by our output, that we are not the sole source of our own security. Instead, that we can trust God, who is the source of all we are, because God stopped working and everything held together. Creation did not require God's constant attention to remain good. God rested in the midst of creation, and the world was still good. So this week, I challenge you to take a moment each day and notice when you could stop and savor the presence of God. You don't need to stop for the whole day, you don't need to stop for the whole hour, but just notice. It might be in a moment when you've finished one task before you start the next, to just take a deep breath and savor that God is with you and work. Maybe it's when you come home and you put all your things away, rather than just jumping into whatever is demanding your attention at home. Again, take one moment to pause and take a deep breath and savor that God is with you in your life. Or maybe before you sit down to eat a meal, that pause to give a moment of gratitude to God for the food that you're about to eat. Practice that art of pausing. Notice what it feels like to stop. Notice what pulls you back into motion so quickly. What is it that is calling your attention? Because we can't get to the larger practice of Sabbath without beginning to practice one small moment at a time. It reminds us that the world continues on without us managing it, and that we can be present to God's work in our life when we stop and take a deep breath. Over the next 5 weeks, we are going to celebrate this gift of Sabbath. We're going to look at the full arc of Scripture. We're going to hear about that commandment next week. Then we'll hear the invitation from Jesus for all who are weary to bring their burdens to him, and he will give them rest. Then we will look at a very interesting scene about Jesus healing on the Sabbath and all the drama that happened after that. Then we'll stand at the empty tomb on the first day of the week and discover that the new creation has already begun. And then finally, we'll end this series with the vision from Revelation, where the river of life flows freely and there is no more night. There is simply the presence of God forever. And all of those moments of Sabbath begin right here at the beginning, on the seventh day that had no evening, the day that God stopped and blessed and declared it to be very good. So this week, let's begin this journey into practicing Sabbath by starting small, pausing, and pay attention to what you find. We'll find a rest that has been woven into creation since long before any of us were made, waiting for us to come home and discover God there in that cathedral of time. I'm going to give you 5 minutes to sit with this text. You may want to journal in the blank space in your bulletin today, or you may want to turn to a neighbor to discuss some reflection questions. The text says God rested, but it does not say that God disappeared. What do you imagine God was doing on the seventh day? And what might it mean that God rested in the midst of creation rather than withdrawing from it? What would it mean to treat one day each week as genuinely different from all the others? What would you have to stop doing? What in your daily life do you find it hardest to stop doing, to set down or walk away from? And what does that say about where you are placing your trust? Let us now listen together to the Spirit speaking to us.